Well, it's been a while since the last episode of my Weirdest Knife series, and some people have asked about it, so here we go again. This is probably the lower end of weirdness as far as the series is concerned. I generally like to focus on strange opening mechanisms, you know, the kind of knife that you look at and you just can't even figure out how to open it at first. And, weird knife shape is definitely not the strangest that I've shown so far, but this still makes the cut, so to speak. So let's take a look. This is made by HEMA and was sent to me by Gearbest for review. And well, you may know that I have a bit of a weakness for strange, exotic designs that are kind of, eye-catching, but they still need to be somewhat functional, ideally. This, well, let's start with the positives, shall we? It is Oz 8 steel, which is pretty good, and the hardness is listed as 58 to 60 HRC, which is, again, good, and it's got G10 handle scales. Okay, it's got a point. It's another good thing. I think the positives probably end there. Let's see, sharpness, as it comes, is just about okay. I mean, it is okay on this part of the edge. The upper part, on the other hand, you can see how that tears more than it cuts. And there's a particular issue with this, well, there are a number of issues with this blade shape. One being that it's very thick and it tapers a lot. The problem with that is the angle of the edge grind is really not ideal for cutting. It's very steep. Generally, if you have a very thick blade, in order to get a nice fine edge with a fairly acute angle, it needs enough space to taper sufficiently. So you need ideally a fairly wide blade. If it's thick and narrow, you've got some issues. This is not going to cut terribly well. The other problem is the knife is kind of confused. It doesn't really know what it wants to be. Now, it's not a sickle knife. It's not like a regular hawk bill or claw knife. It's kind of in between. It has a bit of the recurve, scimitar-ish handle curvature, then it goes straight, then the spine curves away while the edge curves in the opposite direction. So that is a really, really weird choice, and this causes some problems. So even if I just grab foam, which of course is very easy to cut, run to the issue, so the cut goes up to here, and then where that point is, it wants to get stuck. And then as you continue the cut, the resistance increases more and more, because toward the point it narrows even further, which makes the angle yet even steeper. So it cuts progressively worse the further toward the point it goes. So it pretty much gets stuck here, and you just kind of have to brute force it through, and at that point it just rips. It doesn't really cut. Now the point can be used for cutting, of course, well, tearing, I suppose. So if you have fairly soft material, it will just dig right in and it can tear that way. Of course that works. And for cutting grooves into wood, for example, that's perfect. Nothing wrong with that. But it's fairly shallow cuts, and it's a very particular kind of application that doesn't happen all that often. So before, I've reviewed this blade here, which also has kind of a hook point, but this one doesn't taper anywhere near as much, so it doesn't compromise the edge angle as much as the other one. And this is more consistent. You know, this is more or less straight. There's a slight recurve here for better slicing, and then it curves in at the end. You can work with that. You've got a lot of edge here for a smooth cut, whereas on this one, essentially you get up to here and then it likes to get stuck on this corner or point or whatever you want to call it, and then it slips off to this part here. To demonstrate that, if I wanted to cut this, goes fine up to here, then it gets stuck, then it slides off weirdly, which is a bit of a safety concern as well, and then it skips this part of the edge pretty much, because it just kind of hops off. So this is not effective for a cut, and it's not smooth. It's kind of a jarring experience, so to speak. Now what you can do, of course, is just use a push cut with just one of the two sections of the blade. This works fine. Now if you wanted to use more of the blade or a different part, this already fails, because the edge is that much, like the angle is that much steeper here, and it's also noticeable that you don't have as much mass here. So this much mass and then this narrow and thick, you can't really push very well into the material. It just kind of gets stuck. It doesn't really want to do much. So the balance is weird overall. If I want to cut a strap, if I want to cut a strap, I'm also left with the same issue of where do I actually put this? Because now it's partially in contact with this, and that point keeps it away from the other part of the edge. So do I put it here? Do I put it there? This is not going to cut very well because of the issues I've mentioned with the edge. If I cut this here, I mean, it works, but it doesn't feel as smooth as with another kind of blade. Let me double that up. So 2 layers. See how that goes. Yeah, it already struggles with that. It kind of gets stuck a little, and you see here it kind of slips out because of the way it tapers. This part just kind of slips out. I did not mean to flip you off there, by the way. It just kind of slips out without completing the cut. So I'm kind of thinking that maybe they had self-defense in mind when designing this, because then it would make sense to use this, you know, kind of as a claw. You know, you would rake with that, you would push in the point and then draw, stuff like this. This can also be used for thrusting because the point is mostly in line with the hand. You don't have as much mass here. In other words, if you wanted to do this kind of tip chop, the balance is off. Like, it doesn't matter as much on a knife as it does on a sword, of course. It's all smaller scale, but you can still tell this does not have the kind of impact that, well, even this has. You know, this, I feel there's just more heft behind it. So tip work is still an option with this, but the problem with that is also it's a little straight for that. You know, generally if you have a hook blade, you know, a karambit, for example, would be a traditional example, where it's, you know, fairly strong curve, and this would dig into the target as you draw. This, on the other hand, because the spine actually curves away, so it counteracts that forward curvature to keep it relatively straight. I haven't even talked about the handle yet. So this also tapers a lot, and this gets really narrow toward the end. There's not a whole lot to hold on to. That's just not enough contact here. Up there it's okay, but then it just tapers too much. And the curvature, you know, is kind of the right idea, or a step in the right direction, because for a fighting knife you want this to be secure in the hand, you don't want this to slip away, but it's not quite strongly curved enough to really make that much of a difference. I mean, it might be okay if it wasn't so narrow. You could strike with that, so that is a nice thing, but it's not super secure in the hand, and that's kind of what mainly matters. You know, if it slips out of your hand, then a fighting knife is no good, obviously. So yeah, in my opinion, the blade should be a lot thinner. It should be wider. The handle should be wider here, and this should be either overall fairly straight, or it should be a fairly pronounced inward curvature, or a recurve or curving, consistently in one direction. That would be a lot better in my opinion. Now, the good thing here is the sheath. This is really well designed. It snaps in positively and doesn't have any rattle to it at all. It's easy to remove. Good. And also it's got the tack lock style belt clip. So the sheath is actually the best thing about this, in my opinion. As I said, the steel quality itself is also pretty decent. Okay, so what that leaves us with is the category of collector's knife. A cool fantasy knife just for the collection, just because it looks cool and everything. Whether or not you think it does, well, that's debatable, of course. I like some aspects of the design, like the way the handle curves and tapers. It may not be very practical, but it does look nice, in my opinion at least. Now the blade has kind of a, I don't know, pseudo Batman feel to it. A bit of like a bat wing kind of thing going on. It's currently listed for a bit under 40 Canadian dollars, and on sale it's going to be less. It's still a bit much for a knife that doesn't really have a whole lot of functionality, in my opinion. If you still want to check it out, I'll leave the link down below. But since Gearbest is doing one of the annual sales, I'm also going to link a few other knives that I personally like a lot better, so you may be able to find a good deal during the sales. Anyway, I hope you liked the review. Thanks for watching, and have a good one, folks.